Okay, I just wanted to create a quick little video explaining murmurs in the best way that I have found. In didactic, I hated murmurs. I was just going to take the L and get them all wrong on the exam because I was struggling with them. I thought it was dumb. I couldn't figure it out. And then through videos and through other people, I learned these little quick methods of memorization that really helped me figure them out. And then now when I see a murmur on a question, I love it because usually it's a gimme question because if you know these few little things, then you're golden. So this is the murmur guide that I created. And some of this is memorization and some of this is you can think through a little bit. So first in this corner, we have the congenital murmurs. Now, a lot of these are going to be described with signs and symptoms, not just the murmur. There are a few of them that are diagnostic by the murmur, and they could say, this is the murmur that was heard. What is the congenital abnormality? But again, some of them are not that specific, and they're going to have signs and symptoms with them. So first is ASD. Now this one is more specific murmur. It's split second heart sound. Now, Cram the Pants, he has a good way of remembering this, that when you're drawing an A, the last thing you do is you cross the A or you split it. And that can help you remember that you're splitting the second heart sound. Now, VSD is a harsh holosystolic murmur. Now, this one is also more diagnostic, but it is part of our murmur man down here, which I'll describe in a minute. Now, PDA is a continuous machine-like murmur. Now, this one is very diagnostic, and it's important to be able to pin PDA with continuous machine-like murmur. This is one that you could see a vignette of you're listening to a baby and you hear a continuous machine-like murmur. What is the diagnosis? The next one, coarctation of the aorta, is a systolic ejection murmur. Again, this is one that maybe isn't as specific, just because if you look at down here at tetralogy of Fallot, there's also a harsh systolic ejection murmur. So again, they would have to give symptoms or other diagnostic tools to help distinguish between those. Now, transposition of the great arteries. I don't really have a good way of remembering this. It's just a single loud second heart sound. So again, just to reiterate, a lot of these are going to be given with signs, symptoms that help you distinguish. The underlying ones are more specific to these diagnoses. Another way of looking at it is murmurs by location. Again, this can kind of vary a little bit, but it is good to know, or it was easier for me to narrow down of if they're saying left lower sternal border, well, I know that's the tricuspid point. And then I was able to memorize these. Well, it's going to be the tricuspid murmurs, tricuspid regurg, tricuspid stenosis. And then what else would be heard down there would be the ventricle septal defect. So I just broke it down into the different places that we listen: aortic, pulmonic, second pulmonic or Erb's point, tricuspid, and then mitral. And all these are relatively self-explanatory. There's some variation. Aortic, we're going to hear aortic stenosis. Pulmonic stenosis. ASD and PDA. Pulmonic, aortic regurg, pulmonic regurg, and then hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. And then again, tricuspid regurg, tricuspid stenosis, and ventricular septal defect. And then the last one is mitral regurg, mitral stenosis, and then MVP or mitral valve prolapse. So again, that's just a quick way of kind of figuring out where they would be or where it would best be heard. But the murmur man here is probably the number one way that I am able to figure out murmurs on exams. So this is like one of the first things I write down on my whiteboard when I'm taking an exam for cardiac exams. And it does take some memorization to try and figure it out a little bit. I have some tips and tricks, not sure how well they work. I feel like I kind of just had to memorize where the different things would go. So the idea of it is that this up here is a guy's head, this is his body, and these are his arms. Now, we'll start from the left side and go over. So his right arm is going up, so that's a crescendo murmur. And his left arm is going down, so that's a decrescendo murmur. Now his head is going up and down, so that's a crescendo, decrescendo murmur. And then his body here is going to be holosystolic murmurs. You can remember that because it's long, holosystolic murmurs. Now at the bottom here, we can also see that each section, his arms are going to be diastolic, and his head and bodies is going to be systolic. Now, how do you remember to write which ones in what section of his body? There isn't a super great way to remember this. There's a few things that you just have to remember, and then I created a little mnemonic. I don't love it, but it can help a little bit. So hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, you kind of just need to remember that this one goes there. There's an H in it, so it goes in his head. Now, let's go to his body. Mr. VSD. He has a name tag on him, and it says Mr. VSD. I also remember that Mr. VSD, he wears ties. And he wears his ties on the right side. TR, tricuspid regurg, ties. I know this is the left side, but we're just going to pretend that when we're looking at him, this is tricuspid regurg or his tie. Now, going to the mnemonic. So, the mnemonic I created is AS, the Postal Service, then we're going to hop to his arm, made stops to Sheldon, a robber performed robbery. Again, don't love it. I kind of just memorized where they go, but that's one way you could help to memorize it and write this out on your exam. And we'll go through some examples of how to use this. Then another quick way to distinguish between systolic versus diastolic, I found a little easier for me, just quick way to do it rather than having to draw this whole thing out if I hadn't already, is TPAM. So this is tricuspid, pulmonic, aortic, and mitral. And when you look at these, you're going to write on top RSSR and the opposite on the bottom, SRRS. And these stand for either stenosis or regurg. So as the colors correlate here, these are your systolic murmurs and these are your diastolic murmurs. So tricuspid regurg, systolic, pulmonary stenosis, systolic, aortic stenosis, systolic, and mitral regurg, systolic. Now, if we look at the diastolic murmurs, we have tricuspid stenosis, pulmonic regurg, aortic regurg, and mitral stenosis. And those would be your diastolic murmurs. So that's just a quick way I found to remember it. This works too. I mean, it's all in the same brackets, but that was just a quicker way if I didn't have this written out on my exam. So I wrote down the murmurs, or I wrote them out down here. There are a couple things that I underlined that are very diagnostic, kind of the same as like the PDA being machine-like. If you see anything that radiates to the axilla, it's going to be mitral regurg. As you can see up here, if it's mitral regurg and radiating to the axilla, that's a close way to radiate. The other one that is radiating is aortic stenosis. This is radiating to the carotids. Again, if you look up here where we hear aortic stenosis, the carotids aren't far away and it can radiate to the carotids. Mitral stenosis is an opening snap. You can remember that just by thinking mitral stenosis, snap, SS. I don't know, that's the best way I could remember it. That one's very diagnostic as well. And then MVP, is a systolic ejection click. And I remembered that by thinking the MVP, or the most valuable player, was part of a click. And then there are a few other tips as well, and this is not all encompassing of everything you need to know about murmurs, but I feel like this gets you really far, is that right-sided murmurs increase with respiration or increase with inspiration. So I remembered this by thinking respiration, respiration. So, for example, tricuspid murmurs are on the right side of the heart. They will increase with respiration. And then another tip is that mitral valve prolapse, the click, and hypertrophic cardiomyopathy murmurs, they decrease in volume when you increase preload, such as squatting. That's kind of just something that you need to know. They're going to describe this often in murmurs. And then to note that all other murmurs are going to increase when you increase the preload. So these are the exceptions. Okay, let's do some examples. And on these examples, I gave the answers right away just so that we could see, we could think through the process of why it is what it is. And I found that most helpful when learning murmurs. So here we have a long vignette, and as you can see, a lot of it isn't super relevant to the diagnosis if you know how to describe the murmurs. So we have this woman, she's coming into the emergency department. Looks like she's having difficulty breathing, she's weak, she has altered mental status, etc. Now in the highlighted portion here, we have auscultation along the left sternal border and apex of the heart reveals a systolic, soft, low-pitched, decrescendo murmur without thrill radiating to the axilla. Now I put this one first because although the Murmur Man is great and it helps us describe a lot of murmurs, it is not all inclusive. So if we go back, radiating to the axilla is one of our buzzwords. And if we look, radiating to the axilla is always going to be mitral regurg. Now we are also told that we are listening at the apex of the heart. And if we look at the apex of the heart, technically it could be either of these spots you could consider the apex of the heart, but when we are given radiating to the axilla, we know that it is mitral regurg. The reason that this isn't all-inclusive, because here they're describing mitral regurg as a low-pitched decrescendo murmur, and here we have it as a holosystolic murmur. And really the murmurs can vary a little bit in how they are described, but with the clues, you should be able to figure out what the murmur is. Now, if we're looking aortic dissection, the symptoms presenting are not of aortic dissection. Aortic stenosis, although it is still a systolic murmur, that would be best heard at the right second intercostal space. So that doesn't fit. And then mitral valve prolapse, it could, but again, we don't have a click like we should if it's mitral valve prolapse. We're having a radiating to the axilla, which is diagnostic for mitral regurg. Okay, let's do another one. So here we have a 65-year-old man presenting to the clinic for a gradual decline in exertional fortitude and dyspnea on exertion that has been getting worse over the past 2 months. Physical exam demonstrates mid-systolic murmur heard best at the second intercostal space near the right sternal border. The murmur decreases with isometric hand grip and Valsalva maneuvers, which is the most likely diagnosis. So if we just look at how they are describing the murmur, in this sentence here, physical exam describes a mid-systolic. Okay, well, now we have narrowed it down to these here. And the murmur is best heard at the second intercostal space on the right sternal border. Well, what is the only murmur that we can hear at that space is aortic stenosis. And again, we know it's not mitral regurg because that would be a diastolic murmur. We know it's not mitral regurg because that would have radiating to the axilla and it would most likely be holosystolic. Again, there's some variation there. It's not mitral stenosis because that is a diastolic murmur as well. And it's not mitral valve prolapse because we're not hearing any click. Okay, so another example here is a 3-day-old infant presenting for a weight check. Now, right off the bat, 3 days old, we can most likely think of congenital abnormalities, although valvular abnormalities are still common. The congenital list, now we're queuing into that. On physical exam, there is a holosystolic murmur along the left lower sternal border. Well, if we look at our murmur man, we know that it's holosystolic. Well, so now we have, is it either mitral regurg? We're not even given that option. Tricuspid regurg, again, we're not given that option. And VSD, which is the correct answer. Now, if we go and look, they even told us where they're listening. They told us that they're listening at the left lower sternal border, which is the most common place for VSD to be heard. And one more example here. Which of the following cardiac auscultation findings is most consistent with mitral valve regurgitation? Okay, well, we have mitral regurg, and if we look here, is mitral regurg a crescendo-decrescendo murmur? No, it's not in the head of our murmur man. Is it a high-pitched early diastolic murmur? No, because it's not in either of our arms. We know that mitral regurg is a systolic murmur. Is it a loud opening snap and diastolic rumble? Well, we know opening snap is mitral stenosis, so it is not this. It's not C. And mid-systolic click is consistent with MVP, mitral valve prolapse, and that would be a systolic murmur. But they're not asking for mitral valve prolapse, they're asking for mitral valve regurgitation. So, which of the following is the most common? A soft S1 and loud blowing holosystolic murmur, which we can see in our murmur man because it is right there. So, I hope that this helped a little bit. And that you're able to learn. Again, there's some things that just are memorization, and there's other things that are more consistent that can help you hopefully identify murmurs on exams.